In the early 1960s, Pontiac engineered an absolute monster, an engine so fast, so unrelenting, and so dominant on both drag strips and racetracks that it changed the trajectory of American muscle forever. This is the hidden story of the Pontiac 421 Super Duty, a factory-built race engine that became too powerful, too successful, and too controversial for its own good. It was never meant for the public eye, yet its legend still echoes through the golden age of Detroit performance. To understand how the 421 Super Duty came to be, we need to rewind to the late 1950s, when Pontiac was struggling to find its identity. The brand was known for producing conservative, uninspired vehicles that appealed mostly to older drivers. Sales were slipping, and the company's future looked uncertain. That all changed in 1956 when Seaman Bunky Knudsen took over as general manager. Knudsen had a bold vision. He wanted to rebuild Pontiac's image from the ground up, and he believed racing was the key to doing it. But there was a problem in 1957. The Automobile Manufacturers Association, AMA, introduced what became known as the Gentleman's Agreement. It called for all American car makers to withdraw from factory-backed racing and stop advertising their cars based on performance or speed. This came after several high-profile fatal crashes, including at the Indianapolis 500 and the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which stirred public concern about racing's dangers and street performance. General Motors, being the industry leader at the time with nearly half of America's market share, publicly supported this ban, but behind closed doors, Knudsen wasn't about to let Pontiac fade away quietly. Jim Wangers, Pontiac's famed marketing man, later recalled Knudsen's reaction vividly. "To hell with it, I've got a division to save, and we're going racing," and that's exactly what he did. While most other manufacturers backed off, Pontiac went all in 1959. The brand introduced the 389 cubic inch V8A, development of the earlier 370 engine. The 389 became known as the Trophy 8 and could be fitted with different carburetor setups, including the now legendary Tri-Power, which used 3 two-barrel carburetors for maximum performance despite the official ban. Pontiac's underground racing strategy began paying off fast through what was described as unofficial factory backing. Pontiac cars started dominating both drag strips and NASCAR circuits. The results spoke for themselves. 1 NASCAR Grand National victory in 1959, 6 wins in 1960, and an astonishing 30 victories in 1961. Pontiac was on fire, but the engineers knew that to stay on top, especially with Ford, Chrysler, and Chevrolet ramping up their high-performance engines, they'd need something even more powerful. The 389 was good, but not enough. Pontiac needed a bigger weapon. By 1961, the superstock drag racing scene was packed with huge displacement powerhouses. Chevrolet had its 409. Ford was rolling out serious horsepower, and Dodge had the 413. Max Wedge ready to go. Pontiac's 389 couldn't quite keep up, so the engineers pushed the limits. They bored and stroked the 389 to create a 421 cubic inch beast. This new engine wasn't just a bored-out version, it was redesigned for durability and brute strength. The 421 featured larger main bearings, 325 inches in diameter, which made it much stronger under racing stress. Legendary mechanic Smokey Yunick actually left Pontiac in protest, arguing that the larger bearings would reduce high RPM performance. But Pontiac's goal was endurance as much as speed, and the design worked. The result was an engine that could take extreme punishment. It had a 409-inch bore and a 4-inch stroke, forged steel internals, forged aluminum pistons, many from Mickey Thompson himself, and special high-flow cylinder heads. Then, right before the 1961 NHRA Nationals, Pontiac shocked the racing world with an announcement. A 421 cubic inch high-performance engine would be available to qualified drivers. It wasn't something the average customer could just buy from a dealer. These engines were hand-built, shipped directly to race teams, and installed post-delivery. Essentially, it was a secret factory racing program hiding in plain sight. The 421 feet's first major appearance came before the official announcement. In August 1961, racer Hayden Proffitt drove a Mickey Thompson-built Pontiac equipped with the 421 to victory at the Pomona Valley Timing Association meet in California, but its true breakout moment was a month later at the NHRA Nationals in Indianapolis, where Proffitt ran a quarter mile in 1,255 seconds at 110 miles per hour. The only car in its class to hit the 12-second range competitors didn't stand a chance. Pontiac rated the Super Duty 421 at 405 horsepower, but that figure was wildly conservative. When Motor Trend tested it in 1962, they found it actually made around 465 horsepower and over 500 lb-ft of torque. An internal GM memo from Chevrolet's Vince Piggins confirmed similar numbers, estimating about 468 horsepower and 500 lb-ft. For the 1963 version, the engine featured dual Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors, each moving 500 cubic feet of air per minute, mounted on a special aluminum intake A solid lifter cam designed by engineer Malcolm Mack Keller, known as the Messy Keller No. 10, allowed the engine to spin to an incredible 6,400 RPM for a full-size car engine in the early 60s. That was astonishing. However, this success created a major problem. The NHRA changed its rules for 1962, stating that all engines and components used in stock class racing had to be factory installed, not dealer added. This forced Pontiac's hand to keep competing legally. They had to make the 421 Super Duty a genuine production option, and so they did, but in extremely limited numbers. In 1962, Pontiac offered the Super Duty 421 as a factory-installed option on Catalina and Grand Prix two-door models. Calling it a production car was almost laughable. It was essentially a race car disguised as a street vehicle. The option cost roughly $2,250, nearly as much as a whole base model Catalina, which sold for about $2,700. You were basically buying an entire second car's worth of performance. The 421 package came with everything built for endurance: 4-bolt main bearing caps, forged steel parts, NASCAR spec cylinder heads, and free-flowing cast iron headers with removable dumps so racers could uncork the exhaust at the track. The car came only with heavy-duty manual transmissions, either a 3-speed or Borg-Warner T10 4-speed. No automatic could handle its torque. Pontiac even offered aluminum body panels, fenders, hoods, radiator supports, and bumpers, cutting nearly 200 pounds from the front end. Only a handful were made, making them among the rarest Pontiacs ever built. In 1962, just 155 Catalinas and 16 Grand Prix models were equipped with the 421 Super Duty. Interestingly, Pontiac built exactly 421 Catalinas with 421 engines in total that year, a poetic nod to the engine's name. And on the track, they were unstoppable. The Super Duty cars dominated NASCAR and drag racing alike, rewriting the definition of American performance. They were practically unbeatable on the drag strip and just as fierce on the oval. Circuits Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler were all scrambling to keep up, but Pontiac continued to dominate the spotlight by late 1962. However, Pontiac's engineers saw the writing on the wall while their cars were still winning. The competition was catching up fast with larger engines and lighter bodies. If Pontiac wanted to keep its edge for the 1963 season, they needed something extreme, something that would push performance engineering to its absolute limits. That radical answer became known as the Swiss Cheese Catalina, one of the wildest machines ever created for factory racing to reduce weight. Pontiac engineers literally redesigned the Catalinas. Frame: they cut open the boxed frame rails, turning them into U-shaped channels, and then drilled over 100 holes, roughly 120 to 130 in total, through the frame itself. The result looked like a piece of Swiss cheese, hence the nickname, but the weight reduction didn't stop there. The front sway bar was removed since it was unnecessary for straight-line performance. All insulation, soundproofing, and excess trim were stripped out. The aluminum panels introduced in 1962 were made even thinner for 1963. So thin, in fact, that people claimed you could dent them with your thumb. Even the exhaust manifolds were cast in aluminum, cutting their weight down to just 27 pounds compared to 72 pounds for the cast iron versions. The downside, they couldn't handle the heat. Legendary mechanic Smokey Unick reported that the aluminum manifolds would fail after only a few laps of hard racing. Pontiac also replaced the bell housing and differential housing with aluminum parts and deleted non-essential features like heaters, radios, and in some cases, even replaced glass with plexiglass windows. The result was a brutally light and raw race. Machine weighing around 3,300 pounds, nearly 250 pounds less than a standard Catalina, combined with the 421 Super Duty engine, which in reality produced closer to 500 horsepower. These cars were monsters on the strip, regularly running the quarter mile in the low 12-second range at around 120 miles per hour. Only 14 Swiss Cheese Catalinas were ever built, and none were sold to the general public. Instead, they were handed directly to Pontiac's most trusted racers, names like Mickey Thompson, Arnie the Farmer Beswick, and Jim Wangers. But there was a price for such radical weight-saving measures. The drilled-out frames were so fragile that they had to be reinforced with heavy wooden beams during assembly just to prevent them from collapsing on the production line. Many of these frames later cracked during competition, forcing teams to rebuild or replace them. Despite the fragility, these cars embodied Pontiac's all-or-nothing racing attitude. Yet, as Pontiac's race cars were cleaning up on the track, trouble was brewing in Detroit at the time. General Motors controlled over half of the American car market, an unprecedented level of dominance. This made the company a target for the U.S. Department of Justice's antitrust division. There was growing fear inside GM that the federal government might take action to break up the company, just as it had done with Standard Oil decades earlier. By mid-1962, the situation grew more complicated. Henry Ford II announced that Ford was officially pulling out of the AMA's so-called gentleman's agreement, the industry-wide ban on factory-supported racing. He believed racing was essential to marketing and sales. Chrysler followed Ford's lead, claiming that the agreement was void. That left GM in a bind. Ford and Chrysler were now openly building and advertising race cars, while Pontiac and Chevrolet were secretly doing the same, directly violating GM's public stance on the AMA ban. Then, in January 1963, things came to a head after American Motors president Roy Abernethy warned that promoting high-speed racing would attract negative government attention. GM's top executives called an emergency meeting. Whether they were directly pressured by the government or just afraid of intervention remains uncertain. But within days, the company issued a sweeping internal order. On January 24, 1963, GM officially banned all factory-backed racing programs and the sale of competition-only engines that included Pontiac's Super Duty 421 and Chevrolet's experimental 427 mystery motor. It was a devastating blow practically overnight. Pontiac's legendary Super Duty program, the one that had transformed its image and catapulted it to the top of the performance world, was dead by the time the ban was announced. A few 1963 Super Duty cars were already in the works. In total, only 88 Super Duty engines were produced that year, including the 14 Swiss Cheese Catalinas and a small number of lightweight Tempests that would go on to become legends of their own. The ban crippled Pontiac's racing dominance. The brand that had built its entire identity around high performance suddenly couldn't promote racing or build race-ready engines. But as the saying goes, you can't unmake a legend. The 421 Super Duty had already changed everything. It proved that Pontiac could build engines every bit as competitive as Ford or Chevrolet, and it created a massive fan base of performance enthusiasts. Jim Wangers, Pontiac's marketing genius, found clever ways around GM's corporate policies. He organized performance seminars for dealers, showing them how to promote speed equipment and high-performance models without direct factory involvement. Dealers, being independent franchises, weren't bound by GM's internal bans, allowing Pontiac's performance image to live on unofficially. The lessons learned from the Super Duty program would soon give birth to something even bigger. In 1964, less than a year after the racing ban, Pontiac introduced the GTO, often called the first true muscle car. It was essentially a Tempest with a 389 cubic inch V8, a direct descendant of the Super Duty engineering program. The GTO was supposed to sell only 5,000 units, but over 32,000. Rolled off the line that year, by 1966, sales had doubled. The muscle car era had officially begun, built on the foundation of the 421. Super Duty's innovations. By 1967, the 389 was replaced with the 400 cubic inch V8, an improved version that powered icons like the GTO, Firebird, and Trans Am. The 421 itself lasted until 1966, before evolving into the 428 in 1967, and eventually the 455. In 1970, each of these engines could trace its DNA directly back to the original Super Duty program. Today, genuine Super Duty Pontiacs are among the most sought-after and valuable American cars ever built. A 1962 or 1963 Super Duty Catalina can fetch prices approaching $500,000, while the few surviving Swiss cheese cars are essentially priceless museum pieces. But the legacy of the 421 Super Duty isn't just about rarity or money. It's about impact. This engine marked the turning point where performance stopped being a back-alley passion and became a legitimate part of American automotive culture. It symbolized an era when engineers could build purpose-built race cars right out of the factory. The Super Duty's success proved that racing wasn't just for glory. It sold cars. Pontiac's transformation from a fading brand to a performance powerhouse came directly from the excitement this engine created. The 421 Super Duty existed for only 2 short years, but it redefined what American muscle could be. GM might have tried to bury it, but in doing so, they helped create a legend that refuses to die. More than 60 years later, the name still echoes, a reminder that the Super Duty wasn't just an engine, it was Pontiac's declaration of power, pride, and rebellion, and that message is still heard loud and clear across the automotive world.